2020 was a rough year for everyone, to say the least, and that's putting it lightly considering we all witnessed a global pandemic unfold in real time. The world came to a screeching halt. Stores and streets were empty, everyone locked themselves in their homes. Everything we knew had changed. Quarantine was a polarizing time when you really think about it. It was scary, it was depressing, there were times where I genuinely thought the world was going to end. I'd never seen the entire planet shut down like that before. And while being locked away with nowhere to go, it really left a lot of us with nothing else to do but to sit with our own thoughts. And as scary and depressing as it was also an oddly calming time to me. It gave me time to breathe. I didn't have to worry about a lot of the usual stressors in life because the world had shut down. It was lonely at times too. It was a very conflicting group of emotions. Taylor Swift's 8th studio album, Folklore, is an album that encapsulates all of those aforementioned feelings to me. Folklore came at the absolute perfect time. Influenced by Taylor's own loneliness during quarantine, the album explores themes of escapism, empathy, nostalgia, love, and romance. It astounded me how an album so perfectly captured those distinct group of emotions that I had during quarantine. Listening to Folklore feels like I'm thumbing through the pages of a storybook. Its music and lyrics have an almost cinematic quality to them. Many of the songs aren't autobiographical like Taylor's usual works, but rather told through the lens of fictional narratives. Its sound is so mellow, so atmospheric, yet haunting at times. I love songs and albums that flow like a stream of consciousness, bodies of work that read like a diary. I have always admired Taylor Swift for her songwriting. She has a very distinct voice in her writing, and she strings together words in the most creative of ways. For example, the album's 9th track, This Is Me Trying, a song that I've unapologetically cried to on numerous occasions, mind you, has an absolutely marvelous second verse that perhaps is one of my favorite verses in a song ever. They told me all of my cages were mental, so I got wasted like all my potential. And my words shoot to kill when I'm mad. I have a lot of regrets about that. I was so ahead of the curve became a sphere, fell behind all of my classmates, and I ended up here, pouring out my heart to a stranger, but I didn't pour the whiskey. Now I could honestly sit here for at least 10 minutes and unpack why I love this verse so much and how I relate to it on an almost spiritual level, but for the sake of time, let me just say that it just so perfectly represented the mindset that I was in and the struggles I was facing at the time. As the world was coming apart outside the four walls I was confined to at the height of the pandemic, there was also so much turmoil going on inside me as well. 2020 was a very low point for me emotionally, and the pandemic only exacerbated my depression. In January 2021, I took a trip to the mountains, and while things were somewhat easing up, the world was still feeling the effects of global quarantine. I went hiking for the first time, and it was one of the most peaceful things that I've ever done, but I still remember feeling a profound sadness that day. While I was doing better by that point, I still had my days. I was rather silent that day. I kept to myself. I didn't talk much at all. And on the hike itself, I stayed a few steps ahead of everyone else. I listened to music as I walked through the forest, trying to drown out everything else. But it was only one song, and I had that song on repeat all day. I listened to it roughly 12 times that day, if I remember correctly. That song was The One, the opening track from Folklore. I don't remember why I was so obsessed with the song that day. I guess I just felt like it fit the mood that I was in, and being in the forest high in the mountains felt like the perfect setting to really enjoy it in. I remember breaking down. I remember staying ahead of my friends so they couldn't see me cry. I don't know why I cried. It was just one of those times where I needed to let it out, I guess. But that song has a very special place in my heart because of that day. It's not even a sad song, but it has a very somber feel to it. To me, The One is the perfect representation of what folklore is. It's hard to describe what it does to me, but those that get it, get it. I think we all have that one song that does that to us. Every time I listen to The One, it takes me back to the mountains. It gives me that profound, melancholy, yet peaceful feeling. And that's a feeling that I get from this entire album. The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the songs on Folklore provided much needed comfort during such a rough time for me. Folklore is a body of work that has a lot of distinct sadness to it, but I wouldn't call it a sad album per se. Honestly, Folklore is probably my favorite Taylor Swift album if I'm being honest. It is by far my most revisited album of hers, and for very good reason. Although I have to be in a certain headspace when I listen to it, a very specific state of mind in order to really appreciate it. It's one of those albums that I can't really listen to as background noise. I need to be paying attention to it, feeling every bit of it, soaking it in. I create a very distinct image in my mind whenever I listen to this album, one of a dead silent forest in which I'm the only living thing there. And that's no coincidence. Of course, these images are derived from the album's black and white, rustic, nature-focused cottagecore aesthetic that I adore. right down to the font used in all of his promotional material that calls back to the writing that you would find in a novel. It really sells the storybook vibe of the album for me, truly. Taylor Swift always has such rich, wonderful concepts behind her albums. It's a big reason why, despite not being a die-hard fan of hers, I adore and anticipate every release of hers. Everything from the dark redemption arc of Reputation to the blissful, hopelessly in love lightheartedness of Lover to the sleepless late-night thoughts of Midnights. Folklore is a rather abstract album. It talks about a lot of things, numerous subjects, and tells many stories, but it's all under the umbrella of the feeling of mystique, wonder, and imagination that comes when you're forced to be isolated from the rest of the world. That feeling of isolation that this album brings forth is so profound to me, personally, because of the context of its release. Taylor did not intend on creating an album in early 2020. That year was supposed to be spent promoting her 7th studio album, Lover. But because of the obvious circumstances, everything surrounding the album's promotion was ultimately canceled. During her own personal quarantine, in that isolation, Taylor formulated what will become Folklore. Her approach to the album was very loose. She did not put any restrictions on herself, unlike previous releases. She described the album as exactly as she wanted it to be, without any pressure to have a hit or something that would suit the radio. And adding to the album's wonder, it was a surprise release. Taylor really went against the grain with nearly every aspect of this album, and I honestly credit Folklore with making me respect her as an artist. Folklore takes me to a very specific time and place whenever I listen to it. It's a sad place, a place that I'm glad I'm not in anymore, but at the same time, it's a familiar place, and that familiarity brings me comfort. I honestly didn't appreciate Folklore when it first came out. I even called it overrated. I didn't understand why so many people were foaming at the mouth over this little album, but once I was in those mountains, it really hit me. Folklore is definitely a comfort album for me. I'd be here forever if I talked about every song I liked and what I liked about them, but I still want to shine a light on some of my favorites. As I mentioned before, The One and This Is Me Trying are my 2 absolute favorites from this album. Exile is absolutely heartbreaking in the best way possible, if that makes sense. My Tears Ricochet is another one of my favorites as well. I particularly just love the title of that one so much. Mirror Ball and August are also amazing. I love the vocal layering and the echoes that Taylor's voice has on a lot of the songs on this album. It's amazing. Hoax and Peace are 2 of my favorites as well, and they both end the album on a great note, in my opinion.